means that you're grand. By mere Miss Duchesne, again I'll explain.
Good evening and a warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest this week, the author Tony Zendel, and I'll introduce Tony in just a moment. Welcome wherever you are in the UK and indeed wherever you are in the world. And again, I'm delighted to welcome viewers in Canada, Israel, the United States of America, and every part of the UK you can imagine. Please do ask questions. You can do this by using the Q&A facility on your screen and typing in whatever you would like to ask. As ever, we will try our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. Please also be aware of the chat facility. This allows you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. Finally, this event is being recorded and will be posted on the Milim website at milim.org.uk in the near future. Recordings of many of our past events are on the website, as well as details about our future events for which you can book tickets. And so to our speaker. Tony Zendel was born in Manchester. He says his literary career began when he came second in the London North region of the Department of Health and Social Security poetry competition back in 1980. While working as an instructional designer, this is putting complex thoughts into simple language, he began building up an arsenal of trivia, especially Jewish trivia. He is a county rules official in golf, believing he is well placed to answer such questions as, what do you do if there's a mushroom in your line of putt? His publications include the definitive book of Jewish miscellany and trivia, Jews and the Sea, A Forgotten History, and Mastering the Rules of Golf. This evening, he's speaking about his book, Kosher Foxtrot, Jewish Band Leaders of the Golden Age. Tony, delighted to welcome you, and we are itching to hear what you've got to say. So I'll bow out and over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to share my screen with you. So beware the technical problems. There we go. Well, good evening, and may I first thank Milim for giving me the opportunity to speak on the subject. Virtually every Jewish person I meet has an uncle, aunt, relative, friend of the family, or a friend of the family, musician or singer in a dance band, or who's member of their genetic pool, danced to one of the bands at the Winter Gardens Blackpool or at the Hammersmith Palais or even at the Leeds Locarno. I apologise if I don't mention certain people during the next 40 to 45 minutes. However, I need to begin by saying that something serious is happening, which is that the era of the dance bands is being forgotten. Bodies such as the Jewish Music Institute, who should know better, are just letting it slip and vanish into the mist of time. I wrote my book, Kosher Foxtrot, to try and redress the balance, but I have to say it is hard work. With so much of Jewish history being all about and why we suffer, it's a shame that this glorious period of happiness is being overlooked. So let's get cracking. If you ask people about the history of British music in the last century, there seems to be a gap. They may recall that there was something called music hall, and they may recall Gracie Fields and a funny little fellow called George Formby, and so on to Vera Lynn, Kenny Ball, Cliff Richard, the Beatles, and Adele. And there's a gap. What happened was that in Britain from the 20s to the 40s, there was an explosion of musical creativity that was peculiarly British. It was not jazz, it was not American, and it was called the Golden Age of British dance. And what was very surprising was that during this golden age, many of the band leaders and their sidemen came from the East End of London or North Manchester. They were first or second generation immigrants, and they were Jewish. So to begin with, the golden age. When the old-time music halls in Britain demised, there was a massive void to be filled. It was filled by social dancing. Simply, people went dancing where and when they could get it, whether at the Ritz or the Mayfair Ballroom, if they were posh enough, or the likes of the Hammersmith Palais, or even the Works Canteen or village halls. And this photograph shows the Blackpool Tower Ballroom, which had a capacity of 3,000. This second photograph is a Jewish conductor called Johnny Rosen. He's in Manchester at Lewis's department store, and he would play tea dances. There were hundreds of bands. There was even a Madame Tussauds dance orchestra that played in the restaurant. I've got Stanley Barnett question mark, because I think this may be a photograph of the Jewish conductor Stanley Barnett, but I'm not quite sure. In any case, by the 30s, 4 million people a week went dancing at the weekend. More went dancing than went to football. Amazing number. And there are stories of people coming off shifts in their factories and going straight to the dance halls. Jews were no different. The Royal Ballroom in Tottenham was known as the Jewish Hall because of the number of Jews who went dancing there. Mildred Loss, who was the wife of Joe Loss, said that Sunday night at the Astoria was called Jewish night because of the number of Jews who went there. And I've been told stories about people going on a train to Bolton, to the dance hall there from the Jewish areas in Manchester and Liverpool, and then turning up there. So let's have a clip from those days. This is one of the Jewish band leaders. His name was Ambrose, with one of his singers.
Early to bed, early to rise, makes you healthy, wealthy and wise. Now I'm not very wealthy and I'm not very wise, but here's one thing that I realize. It's so easy to say good morning to you. So easy to say good morning, 'cause look who I say it to. It's so easy to say good morning, a nice day in view. And oh, how the rain clouds scatter when my day begins with you. I'd mumble and grumble when night time was done. It's strange how I've changed now. I jump right up with the sun, for there's always a chance I'll meet you by dawn's early light. It's so easy to say good morning, but so hard to say good night. I'd mumble and grumble when nighttime was done. It's strange how I've changed now. I jump right up with the sun, for there's always a chance I'll meet you by dawn's early light. It's so easy to say good morning, but so hard to say good night.
And that was, of course, Vera Lynn, who wasn't singing We'll Meet Again. People sometimes are surprised that they're used to her in the later years and just singing one song. Vera Lynn, in fact, married a Jewish musician, and I think is actually part of this story especially as she appeared in concerts to raise funds for kinder transport. So came the Golden Age, and the whole infrastructure grew up. Singers, songwriters, agents, musicians, and of course, dance bands, which needed band leaders. And here's some of the band leaders. I've put in one person who was born in Leeds, Ivy Benson. These band leaders became the pop stars of their day. With advances in technology, people could listen to them on the radio or buy gramophone records of their favorite band leader. Some 50 million records were sold in 1929. And of course, they were mobbed wherever they went. Here's the wedding of a band leader called Harry Roy. And as you can see, it's just equivalent to those pictures we know of pop groups getting mobbed. Many of these band leaders became rich men as the money flowed in. And here's an example of some of the money that was sloshing about. It's interesting to know that Harry Roy, in fact, gambled away a lot of the money that he earned. 15 million on gambling. It's absolutely amazing. So I want to talk briefly about the music. Let's have a sample. This is typical of the music of its time. It's taken from a film called Chasing Rainbows, played by Ambrose's orchestra, and the singer is Sam Brown of Jewish Lithuanian extraction.
Happy days are here again, the skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again. All together shout it now. There's no one who can doubt it now. So let's tell the world about it now. Happy days are here again. Your cares and troubles are gone. There'll be no more from now on. Happy days are here again. The skies above are clear again. Let us sing a song of cheer again. Happy days are here again.
The music that these bands played were from a variety of sources, sometimes from stage shows or films, as in the case of the clip, but they weren't jazz and they weren't swing. The point of dance music was that it was dance music. If punters couldn't dance to it, they wouldn't do so. So dance bands tended to avoid jazz. Beer Mr. Shane, by the way, is swing, miles away from dance music. And to explain, when Duke Ellington gave a concert in 1934, no one danced. Everyone stayed in their seats. In the UK, jazz has still had its place and was popular, but it tended to be confined to rhythm clubs and gramophone records, which sold in their hundreds of thousands, but not on the dance floor. The music that was played tended to fall into two categories, sweet or hot. Firstly, sweet. The master of sweet music was the non-Jewish Henry Hall, who played what I have heard as spineless, insipid schmaltz. And here we have an example of some spineless, insipid schmaltz.
ladies. National programme from London. Now you're going to hear the first performance of the new BBC Dance Orchestra, directed by Henry Hall.
It's just the time for dancing. Tomorrow is today. Go where the music's calling and dance the blues away. The world that lies before you is one big dancing floor, and all you need to ask for is just one dance more.
You are hearing the signature tune of the BBC Dance Orchestra. The tune is called It's Just the Time for Dancing.
And that's enough of that. Another example of the music called Sweet or Easy Listening is Geraldo and his Sweet Music, who played nice, inoffensive, melodious, pleasant music guaranteed to soothe the audience. Now, really, can you try not to fall asleep during this clip? And notice that not one of the people in the orchestra are smiling. The opposite. Here's You're the Last Thing in Love with the Harry Roy Band. And notice the difference in the band. And there you go, thus proving that the moonwalk was not invented by Michael Jackson. This was what was known as hot music. It had an element of syncopation. If the band played a fast foxtrot or quickstep, people would call it hot. Simplistically, hot used brass and drums, sweet used violin and pianos. However, I really want you to understand that hot was not jazz. Henry Hall himself called hot music jungle music, which was really typical of the racist attitudes of the time. Sweet and hot, by the way, could apply to jazz as well. Glenn Miller was sweet, and Benny Goodman and Louis Armstrong were hot. As well as sweet and hot, bands would often include a variety number, a novelty number in their act, which shows that it stretched all the way back to music hall and variety. This can be seen in this clip of Harry Roy at the Café Anglais.
And finally, a peep behind the blackout at Harry Roy and his famous band at the Café Anglais, London. And here, in a smiling moment, is Mrs. Harry. We caught Sean Glenville relaxing, and a whole lot of other people too.
Rabbit, run, 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 rabbit,
For the aficionados, you may have noticed Nat Temple doing a lot of moving about there. In reality, the punter didn't really give a damn what it was, whether sweet or hot, as long as they could dance to it. And in this frenetic atmosphere, there were opportunities for the sons of immigrants to make their mark, and not only as band leaders. Here we have some Jewish sidemen. And, you know, everything is so focused on America. We tend to forget that Britain produced its own. For example, it was two Jewish writers that wrote the iconic Sally. It was a writer, Walter Kaufman, who wrote The White Cliffs of Dover. We had our own crooners, Sam Brown, Ray Ellington, for example. So, you know, they may have had their Irving Berlin, but we had our Erich Maschwitz. So let's have a listen to one of these Jewish sidemen. You've already heard a bit of him. It's Sam Brown, and he's singing one of my favorite songs.
Of my coffee, you're the salt in my stew. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you. You're the starch in my collar, you're the lace in my shoe. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you. Most men tell love tales, and each phrase dovetails. You've heard each known way, this way is my own way. You're the sail of my love boat, you're the captain and crew. You will always be my necessity, I'd be lost without you.
And that brings us neatly onto the Jewish band leaders. During the Golden Age, a significant number of the band leaders were Jewish. I was absolutely gobsmacked to find this out. I really had never had that understanding. Here's just a sample of them. And of course, you'll recognize some of them straight away. Joshua Loss, for example. Some were a bit more obscure, but that isn't it. There's a lot more, and there are more, beyond this. So notice, by the way, if I flick backwards and forwards, Shoreditch, Spitalfield, Stepney, East End, and then North Manchester. People being there, and then the odd person from somewhere else. Johnny Rosen actually went and lived in Manchester in the end. Why? Why did they come from these areas? Maybe it was sheer population dynamics. By 1914, the Jewish population in the UK was estimated at 300,000. 125,000 of those were in the East End, 38,000 in the Northwest, over half in just two locations. A factor must have been the poverty, sheer poverty, and the need to earn money from the get-go. And in the case of Billy Amstel, he found no difficulty in joining a band by age 13, played his brother's sax while still at school. He earned 13 shillings a night of which he got to keep sixpence if he'd been the good boy. Phil Moss from North Manchester, on the other hand, began as a bugler with the Jewish Lads Brigade and then joined brass bands and then went on from there to dance bands. The truth was, as long as they could play an instrument, the opportunities were there for the sons of immigrants to go into the entertainment industry. In high density areas, there would always be someone that you knew. And if that wasn't the case, then you could wander down, if you're in London, to Archer Street in Soho and meet up with contacts. And a lot of stuff was done by the use of favours. They all got started in different ways. I could literally do a talk just on how they all got started. But basically, many went from instrumentalist to band leader in just a few years. And this new phenomenon, the Jewish band leader, was born. And frankly, within 45 minutes, I sadly don't have time to talk about all of them. The top four were these. I think most people would accept that these were the top four. Ambrose was born Bernard Baruch Ambrose. He was born in Warsaw. He came up from the East End. He went to the top of the heap and at the centre of anything. He employed only the best musicians. He paid top dollar. He actually ran 8 bands underneath his name, which was an early case of branding. He had the earning power. He had the name. Even as far back as 1923, that was the case. Harry Roy, on the other hand, was the complete opposite to many of his contemporaries, showing his Eddie Cantor Google eyes. He was a showman first and foremost, and provided the public with an alternative to bland. He didn't play sweet, he played hot, and he was a regular vocalist. Lou Stone was the creative genius. According to Humphrey Lyttelton, the man who kept jazz alive in the UK. And when the BBC created a musical called Pennies from Heaven, 40% of the songs were from Lou Stone. And finally, Geraldo. I love Geraldo. Geraldo was a shapeshifter. He was maybe the best businessman of them all. He followed the trends of the day. So starting off as Gerald Bright at the Majestic, which was the name of the hotel that his band played at. He went to Argentina. He became the Gaucho Orchestra, taking up the tango, which was a craze. Then he decided sweet, and he just shifted according to the needs of the time. There are absolutely dozens of stories about these people and others. I only have time for 2, and in the shameless plug, read the book if you want to know more. Ambrose first. I found it fascinating when I found out this son of a rag seller from Warsaw had a friend in the then Prince of Wales, who, when he was in the States, begged Ambrose to come back to the UK. The Prince of Wales played golf with Ambrose in the south of France, and Ambrose used to let out his flat to the Prince of Wales, no doubt, for some canoodling with Mrs. Simpson. The Prince was also known to have a go on the drums at the Mayfair Hotel when the Prince took a party to that place. The casino at Biarritz was, by the way, named Chez Ambrose because of the amount of time and money that he spent there. As for Lou Stone, he was a pacifist. I got in some hot water for it. I love the story that one evening, Lou Stone gave a concert at an RAF base for 671 Squadron, And during it, many walked out, but not in protest. It was because they were going off to bomb some dams in the Ruhr. During the war, Bluestone toured the bases. And with that mention of the war, it seemed that dance bands would go on forever. It seemed that the golden age would last forever, and that the golden goose would continue to lay its golden eggs. And the war changed everything. Sidney Lipton served as a captain in the Royal Artillery. Nat Temple, the Grenadier Guards. Sid Phillips worked on the intelligence service. And some of them gave concerts for the armed forces. But when it was over, they came back to a different environment. The war had marked the death knell of the golden age. Simplistically, jazz and swing had arrived to be replaced by rock and roll and then pop. In the end, it was the discotheques that killed live dancing from bands. Some, like Lou Stone, more or less retired. Harry Roy struggled on. A man called Sid Phillips went into trad jazz. Stanley Black wrote the music for films such as The Young Ones and for The Goons. And Ambrose went into management. But it was never the same. And according to my research, he became a embittered man. At Bushy, when he was buried there were only a few dozen mourners where once there would have been thousands. And then there was Giraldo. Giraldo had a good war. He ran Ensa. He became the force's favourite. He had the BBC home band. And after the war, he realised the way things were going and started booking dance bands for the cruise ships, for the shipping lines who were going to New York. So much so, in the 50s, Cunard became known as Giraldo's Navy. And then there were the survivors. Nat Temple was a regular on the children's show Crackerjack. Phil Moss of Manchester toured the Northern Circuit for 30 years or more. Joe Loss involved himself with TV, especially Come Dancing. What helped them survive was their versatility. If the audience wanted pop, they gave them pop. If they wanted jazz, they gave them jazz, and so on and so forth. There's a great photograph of Joe Loss in the 60s, 68. They all look old, I think, except for maybe Joe Loss, who's still going and still smiling. And he had the longest career of all of them. But for all of them, the golden age had passed, and frankly, it never returned. But there's another part to their story, which I need to cover. Their Jewishness, their Yiddishkeit. At first glance, it seemed that none of them had recorded Yiddish tunes, nor were any of them from to any extent. I think you have to understand something. These are people who had to work around the week. They would have been working on the Saturday, no time to be from, and they didn't want to highlight their origins. And by highlighting their origins, I don't mean Jewish origins, I mean East End origins for many of them. Many of them ditched their East End accents and wore only the finest tuxedos. Ambrose dressed in his finest clothes, even at the lowest of dance halls, and felt himself on a pedestal above the common man. He felt he had left the East End well behind. Joe Loss's daughter told me that he never spoke Yiddish, which somewhat surprised me. Well, I mean, of course, they will have known each other, and they will have all spoken Yiddish at some point, or they will have known who was Jewish and who was not. and they must have been aware of what was going on around them in the 30s. Many still had families in the East End, and many still had families, I assume, in Eastern Europe. I have this photograph. It's a wonderful photograph, a long trip to Argentina. And please don't tell me that the odd bit of Yiddishkeit and discussion of the East End of London won't have slipped out between these three Jewish superstars. I love this photograph for another reason. It shows them away from the dance band, away from the tuxedos, away from the dicky bows. But as far as Jewish music was concerned, they didn't play it. They weren't being paid to play money to play tunes from the old country. So it's not surprising that Yiddish tunes are rare and scarce. Standing out from that crowd is A Brivla de Mama, which is sung by Al Bowley, who was tragically killed in the Blitz and was easily the most popular singer in Britain in the 1930s. He was called Britain's answer to Bing Crosby. Bowley was told the Yiddish intonation of this song by Lou Stone, and it was released in 1933. We are told that the song stopped the show at the London Palladium when it was first played. So here it is.
Euch sollst du nie versammeln, euch schreib geschwind, liebes Kind, schenke dir ne Home, die Mami wird ein Briefle lesen, und sie wird genesen, heil sie Schmerzen bitte, quicke dir ne Home.
As far as other Jewish tunes, there's a smattering. Here we have Max Bacon, who was Ambrose's drummer, recording a comedy song. He did that quite often. He recorded another one called Bagels, another one. And this was, a very stereotypical tune. Others, Stanley Black recorded an LP called Songs of Our People. Ambrose recorded a selection of Hebrew tunes, and Joe Loss did a rather refreshing new version of Mazel Tov. Sid Phillips provided backing to a very post-war sad song called My Childhood Days, which referred back to the Holocaust. Perhaps the best known offering of this period was this tune by Jack Hilton. This is also a very stereotypical tune.
Mr. Izzy Rubinstein, who was very old, one day playing tiddlywinks had caught a nasty cold. His great-great-grandson wrapped him up and put him into bed. His lawyer called next morning, and this is what he said.
You know, Mr. Izzy is very ill. Is he?
Why, what's the matter with him?
He eats latkes, chatzkes, tischkes, kischkes. It's no wonder he's got bronchitis, but if he had tegels, bagels, lokshen and kamedels, that would be a different diet.
I say, but who are you?
Who am I? You make me laugh. I'm his liar. No, I mean his lawyer. And I called around because I want to know if he's his verse or is he as he was.
The singers were Max and Harry Nesbitt, whose original name were Horowitz. Harry, they're of course a Jewish duo. Harry was the father of Darren Nesbitt, who played the evil Gestapo Nazi in Where Eagles Dare. So, as I said, it's a Yiddish desert. How much do they keep Jewish? Were they, as Jonathan Miller once said, Jewish? Unlike the band leader, Johnny Franks, who in the 50s made a point of playing the stereotype, many of them kept their Jewishness well underground. Joe Lost never forgot he was Jewish. His wife told a story about a wartime search for matzah at Pesach, and according to his daughter, he often wore tzitzis underneath his tuxedo. He certainly supported Jewish charities, and I have this great photograph of him at the Waterbuck Jewish Social Club in Manchester. Of all the band leaders, there are the most articles about him in the Jewish Chronicle, and appropriately enough, he's buried in the Bushey Cemetery in North London. At the other end, the people like Harry Roy, Sidney Lipton, who seem to have lost their religion altogether, and the rest came somewhere in the middle. I don't have time to frankly go all over them, but here are some of the headlines. Wolf Phillips was president of his shul for a time. That temple played at Jewish weddings. The bookbinders of Manchester were a well-known Jewish family. Bookbinder was noted for having Gracie Fields singing for him in aid of the Manchester Jewish Soup Kitchen. And finally, Geraldo. I seem to come back to him all the time. He was the only one I can find out who actually had something in the Jewish Chronicle to wish people a very happy and prosperous New Year and well over the fast. He left money in his will to the Share Zedek Hospital in Jerusalem. And he's now buried in Willesden Liberal Cemetery, as is another band leader called Oscar Rabin. So we come to the end, and that is where they did end. And I think you do a trawl of the cemeteries, and that is a good way of finding out how much of Yiddishkeit they kept. So to sum up, from immigrant beginnings, these people became an integral part of British light entertainment. To forget them is to do them dishonor. They deserve a place in our memories, and it's time they were recognized for what they did, rather than consigned to the dustbin of history just because they don't fit with the lachrymose interpretation that some have about Jewish history. Now, I'm going to finish with Oscar Rabin and his band. Rabin was one of the best of them. Original name Rabinowitz from Riga, a member of Clapton Shul. He was one of the very best of that odd breed that thrived in the interwar years. And here he is. By the way, it's a girl called Beryl Davis doing the singing.
Now for a little music, played by those popular favourites, Oscar Rabin and his Romany band. You've often heard them broadcasting from the Hammersmith Palais de Danse, and here they are on the screen.
Hot hillbilly, I go for rural rhythm. I encore
rural rhythm, it's okay. Rural rhythm, how I love to go to country dances. Know well that it's corny, you can yell and say it's corny. It's swell music for me, better than a big brass band. Clap your hands, wow, wow, dance so nice, wow, wow, dance so nice, wow, wow. To the music of a hilly-billies I go for rural rhythm, I encore, rural rhythm, give me rural rhythm. That's the way to go to town. We're crazy for music, just hot. See, a swing to rhythm you got. Hilly billy boy, shake your shoes and do your blues, shout for more. That's the rural rhythm at the door. Clap your hands, shout for more. Stamp your feet, shout encore. Dance all night till you're sore. To the lady is the craziest rhythm in town. Yeah.
And thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was fascinating. Absolutely great insight. And the book is highly recommended. You can buy it. There's a link on our website or also in the emails that we sent out to you. Now, we do have a few questions. Let's stick with Geraldo because that's where we left off a few seconds ago. Gabriel Sivan has a question from Israel. He says, one day in the early 1960s, I was invited to a cocktail party in northwest London where I was introduced to Geraldo. This first made me aware of how many dance bands were conducted by Jews who came from the East End. My question, was it a need to prove themselves like the Jewish boxers or some innate musical genius?
Well, first of all, for the boxers, it was very much their only escape from poverty. I feel, that was a route out. For the ones that were musicians, it was very interesting because many of them were started by their families. Their families got them to play an instrument. Some of them actually went to a school to learn violin, for example. A number of them went to violin. Many of them started off, strangely enough, playing music at movie houses to the silent movies. And no, it wasn't that I think they wanted to prove themselves. They knew how to play an instrument, and I think that it was just a natural progression. If I don't know, if you weren't going to be a doctor or a lawyer, you might as well be a dance band leader. And the the contacts were there. If you like, I asked Alan Dean this once, who knows about the East End. I said why, and he actually hadn't the faintest, but he said to me it's possible that in that enclosed atmosphere there were so many opportunities, but it weren't nothing to do with a need to prove themselves. No.
Carol Gold asks, have you heard of the band leader Maurice Winnick, born in Manchester in 1902? She says, my uncle Manny Maron, sax player, used to play for him. He was known as the sweetest sax this side of heaven.
Yeah, I have heard of Maurice Winnick. And yes, Maurice Winnick started off in Manchester, but wasn't making enough money in Manchester, and so went down south. I think maybe via Nottingham. I'm not quite sure whether my memory is that good, but yeah, he was known as very sweet, very, very sweet, very. You see, you either like hot or you like sweet. Yeah. So he's a really top class instrumentalist. He was a really great band leader, but he was in the sweet side of things. He was great. He was very successful as well, and he was very well regarded by all the dance band aficionados. So great. I told you that there would be people who knew people who knew people. It always happens. It's amazing that the links are still here.
Well, we've got some more. We've got Madeline Levine, who says, my great uncle Ralph Gethick had a band in Manchester. Are you familiar with him?
Ralph Gethick, yeah, there were a few from North Manchester. I tried researching them. There's not an awful lot of information about them. Of course, the top North Manchester musician was I don't know. It's being mean. There was Gethick. There was Philbot, I suppose. You have to say was the top of the pile. But there were others that came from Manchester. Johnny Rosen was also very important Manchester. But Ralph Gethick, and I'm trying to remember who else. There were a few of them coming from Prestwich. Interesting enough, I come from Cromsall, so close to that.
There is a chapter in the book on Manchester connections, so people who are interested can research further. And another one from Philip Sugarman, Benny Daniels from Hull, who had played with Jack Hilton, led the Blue Rockets after the war. Later, the Benny Daniels Orchestra, based in Glasgow. They were broadcast on the BBC. Is that name well known?
Sadly, not one of the best known. But you got to remember that by the 50s, we're moving away from dance band music, and we're moving more into sort of the jazz big band sort of eras. So there are a lot, and I mean an awful lot, of people who were what I might call the less successful ones. I think it's been said there's Stanley Barnett, for example, who some people in Leeds might know because he took his orchestra to Leeds, although it's unlikely because he took his orchestra to Leeds in the 1930s. So, there are plenty of others that had small bands, especially on the south coast, for example, in the hotels. Yeah.
There are more coming through, but let's ask something else for now. Alan Benstock was interested to see the LVO, the award of the LVO on Joe Loss's headstone, and wondered if you knew anything about the circumstances of him being awarded that, it being a sort of gift from the Queen.
Yeah, Joe Loss was one of the, I think it was the Queen Mother's favourite band, and would appear at Windsor on a regular basis. So it's not really very surprising that he was awarded the LVO. He was, as I said, one of the Queen Mother's favourites. Unsurprising.
We have a question from Alan Mann. How did anti-Semitism impact these bands?
That is a great question. I have one example. It's been very difficult to root it out. Look, they will be playing at some of the poshest places with some of the biggest anti-Semites that were going. I mean, the Duke of Windsor wasn't averse to that sort of thing, that, the society bands, they didn't identify themselves as being Jewish. Having said that, I've got a good clip somewhere from Harry Roy, who got in a bit of an argument with someone and was called a dirty Jew. And it went to court. The whole thing went to court. He was accused of not paying someone. So it was there underneath the surface, I feel. Strange that Lou Stone played the Brivla de Mama, which really identified himself as being Jewish. There were lots of Jews actually in the band. I think in Ambrose's band, out of the 14, if my memory serves me correct, 6 were Jewish. There's a photograph of the band in, and a lot of them were Jewish. So people knew that they were Jewish. Certainly people in the business knew that they were Jewish. But if you're doing a Wet Wednesday in Wigan, frankly, the people have come there for a dance, and they don't really care who it is. Jews never seem to have had the same problem than people from the Caribbean had. Never really had the same problem as they did. I haven't come across hardly any anti-Semitism.
One more have you heard of? This will have to be the last one. This is Gail Simon. Have you heard of my grandfather, Louis Simmons? He was a band leader and violinist. The story in the family is that Joe Loss played in his band. He played the Lions Corner House and elsewhere, and then eventually moved to Harrogate. Is that one on your radar?
No, but I'll make a note of it, and I'll make a note, by the way, of the other one that I was told about, Benny Daniels. And I'll be careful about if it was Joe. If Joe Loss was in his band, we're going back to the very early days, because Loss became a band leader, I think, in the 30s, early 30s. So that is really going way back. Loss was in Ambrose's band as well. So I'll look that up. Louis Simmons, was it?
That's right.
Okay. I will make a point of looking that up.
And I'm interested in the cover of the book. It looks very much in your style of art. Is this one of your pieces?
Yes, I'm afraid it is. Yeah, I tend to. It's a bit of a story, but to cut it short, I bought an iPad. I learned that Hockney used an iPad for drawing, so I bought an iPad, and I've now discovered a way of doing drawings, which is a sort of a cartoony style. So I went on a drawing course as well.
It's fabulous. It's fabulous. And to finish with, I have to ask you, what do you do if there's a mushroom in your line of putt?
Well, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to call someone from the committee out to ask them to remove the mushroom for you, because the mushroom is a growing living thing, and therefore we don't take removing living things lightly. So therefore, theoretically, after half an hour, someone will come out and remove that mushroom for you. A quick kick with the foot would probably also.
That's brilliant.
When no one's noticing.
Tony, thank you so much for being our guest this evening, and we'd love to have you back to speak about one of your other topics at some point in the future. You can buy Kosher Foxtrot using the link on our website or in the email follow-up that you'll get tomorrow. The price is the same, but Milim will get a few coppers if you use one of our links. And as a thank you to you, Tony, we'll send you some of our own trivia and history. This is excellent. By the founders of Milim. This is about the journey of the Jews of Leeds from the inner city to the suburbs. And I'll also send you some of my photographs of Magen David Adom in action in Israel, and I hope you'll enjoy flicking through.
Thank you very much. That's
pleasure.
Lovely.
Now, let me tell you about a couple of our up-and-coming events. Next week, Muriel Schindler will be speaking about her book, The Lost Cafe Schindler. This is a family memoir centered on the grand cafe her grandfather opened in Innsbruck. And then the event following that will be on Thursday, the 9th of September. Author, journalist, and dramatist Tuvia Tenenbaum will be speaking about his book, The Taming of the Jew. Our programme continues through September and beyond. please visit milim.org.uk to sign up for our regular bulletins. All of our events are free, but you can make a small donation on our website, and that will help with the cost of providing these webinars to the community. It remains for me to thank our guest, Tony Zendel, once again. Thank you so much, Tony. And looking forward to seeing you all again soon at a future event. Until then, stay safe. See